My husband's ex has a terminal illness. Before she dies, all she wants is to have a wedding with him. I find her kneeling in front of our house, wearing a white dress, tears streaming down her face. Amanda, I'm almost gone. Please grant my wish. I glance at my husband, Mike. He's tall and slender, standing there rigidly. A hint of pity crosses his face. Karen, stop kneeling. Stand up and talk. My heart drops. I thought he would dismiss this ridiculous request. How naive I was. Karen shakes her head, more tears spilling down her cheeks. She looks at me, her eyes filled with sadness. Amanda, I know I'm being selfish. Just think of it as fulfilling a dying woman's last wish, okay? I close my eyes, struggling to compose myself. Mike, have you promised her? He seems not to hear me. He walks over and helps Karen up. Karen, please stop kneeling. You need to take care of yourself. She rises, swaying unsteadily, then collapses against him. I frown as Mike sighs and supports her, turning to me. Amanda, don't be so harsh on someone who's dying. It's just a wedding. We won't actually get a marriage certificate. I stare at him, feeling bewildered. Karen coughs violently as if she might choke on her own pain. Amanda, just treat this like a favor for me. I won't be here much longer. Maybe 10 months at most. Suddenly, I realize that Karen isn't here to ask for permission. She's here to inform me. They will have their wedding with or without my blessing. Because she's dying. A wave of powerlessness washes over me. I look down, feeling disoriented in this moment. A soccer ball suddenly strikes Karen in the face. My son Nate rushes out, fuming. You bad woman. What right do you have to marry my dad? His eyes blaze with anger. Mike and I pass each other as he rushes to help Karen. I kneel to comfort Nate. Honey, why did you come down? Mike assists Karen and then turns to lecture Nate. Nate, apologize to Karen. Nate's face is scrunched up in defiance. Dad, I'm not wrong. Can't you see that Mom is really upset? She's about to cry. Mike looks at me, but I deliberately avoid his gaze. Karen wipes her tears and smudged makeup with the back of her hand. Mike, I'm fine. The kids don't understand. You don't need to apologize. I take a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Holding Nate's hand, I lead him back upstairs. It's absurd that even a 5-year-old can sense my heartache, while my husband, who shares my bed, thinks I'm being too hard on a dying woman. In the bathroom, I give my son a bath. When he was born, everyone said he looked like his father, but as I've raised him, he's become more like me. Mike has been too busy since Karen returned from abroad. His childhood betrothed who abandoned him when he needed support the most. Yet, whenever she faces difficulties, Mike remains indifferent. I ask my son casually, honey, would you want to leave here with me? He sits obediently in the bathtub, washing his belly and glances at me nervously. Mom, are you mad at Dad? If we leave, shouldn't we take him with us? No matter how sensitive or intelligent he is, he's still just 5. A child who loves his mother and longs for his father, hoping for a complete family. I'm not mad at Dad. I sigh, feeling a weight on my heart. After what feels like forever, Mike finally comes home. He opens the door, looking exhausted, and sees me blow-drying our son's hair. Let me handle it, he says, taking the dryer from me. I step back as he explains while drying Nate's hair. Karen isn't in great health. That soccer ball Nate threw earlier was too dangerous. Children should be taught to behave. I look up at Mike. Are you saying I didn't teach our son well? He pauses, a frown forming on his handsome face. Amanda, why are you being so harsh? My body stiffens. Realizing he's misspoken, Mike rushes over and pulls me into a warm embrace. I'm sorry, Amanda. We still have a long time together. Karen doesn't have much time left. I'll make it up to you after she's gone. Though his hug is familiar and comforting, his words cut deep, like a knife through my heart. It's late at night. Mike is patiently reading a bedtime story to Nate. I sit quietly in a chair across from them, watching my 2 boys. Eventually, my son falls asleep. I see Mike gently tucking him in, then leaning down to kiss his forehead. After knowing each other for 10 years, Mike still looks handsome and gentle. Amanda, it's getting late. Let's sleep together as a family tonight. The warmth in the room envelopes us as Mike hugs me tightly from behind. Good night, Amanda. I close my eyes, savoring the moment. But tranquility shatters with the sharp ring of Mike's cell phone. He answers it, awkwardly excusing himself. Soon, he hangs up and tells me, sorry, I need to go out for a while. Is it about Karen? I ask calmly. He nods. Karen fell down the stairs. The nanny said her life is in danger. I sit up, feeling the tension rise as I watch Mike hurriedly get dressed. I can't bring myself to say, don't go. If his heart is set on Karen, what's the point of keeping him here? The door opens and closes, leaving a chill in the bedroom. The noise wakes Nate, who sits up, his expression uneasy. Mom, does Dad not want us anymore? I hold my son close, patting his back to comfort him. My eyes sting with tears. No, honey. Don't worry. We're the ones who don't want to leave your dad behind. The next day, Mike looks haggard when he picks Nate up from kindergarten. He rushes to explain, I spent the night at the hospital with Karen and her mother. I nod, feeling a mix of anger and resignation. Amanda, I knew you'd understand, he says, relief washing over his face. But all I want to scream is, do you think that as long as you aren't with Karen, you're doing justice to me and our son? You're not doing us any favors. Yet my anger fades to powerlessness. He wants to sacrifice our happiness for her last days. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. A group of men and women in work clothes enter, smiling. We're wedding planners, the leader announces. Stunned, I turn to Mike. Today you're a perfect match. We're here to measure for the suit and wedding dress. Mike's face darkens, anger flashing. Get out. Who asked you to come here? They look at each other, confused. I close my eyes, then open them again. You're right to be here. The groom is my husband, but the bride is not me. An icy silence fills the room. Before I leave, I add, I asked the nanny to leave you some porridge. Eat something and take a break. Your stomach isn't in good shape. Don't stay hungry. As I start to walk away, Mike grabs my wrist. Amanda, believe me, I didn't ask them to come. I know he's trying to protect me from embarrassment, but it's only his words that hurt me. But Mike, you promised her a wedding? The wedding is set for a month from now. I masochistically scroll through Karen's social media, watching her prepare for the big day with my husband, picking out the dress, the venue, the details. The autumn evening is cool as I stand outside the kindergarten, waiting for Nate, who's more than half an hour late. When the teacher finally leads him out, his clothes are messy, and his face is stained. I rush over. What happened? I ask, panic rising. The teacher explains sheepishly, a few kids got into a scuffle. But don't worry, Nate held his own. I squat down, concern etched on my face. Why did you fight? With red-rimmed eyes, he looks at me. Mom, is Dad really going to marry another woman? My classmates say I'm going to be a kid without a father. A chill runs through me. Nate's voice trembles. I'll have a new mother and a new brother and they'll be mean to me. They're talking nonsense, right? Tears well in my eyes. I can handle my pain, but what about his? He's the child I carried for 10 months, and now he's facing such cruelty because of his father. Suddenly, anger wells up inside me. Mike, cancel your wedding with Karen, immediately. The phone rings filled with laughter. Karen's family, her mother and Mike's mother, who has never liked me. Mike's voice lowers. Amanda, stop it. I'll talk to you when I get back. I want to voice all my grievances, but they boil down to one thing. Mike, if you go through with this wedding, I'll divorce you and take Nate. When Mike returns, he looks thinner, his eyes filled with helplessness. Amanda, please stop. Just think of this as a plea. You're always so gentle and considerate. I look at him in silence. He doesn't take my words seriously. Mike, this isn't fair to our son. Mike recalls our first meeting. You stayed with me through everything. When Karen left, it was you who helped me stand back up. But even in our darkest days, I've never felt as devastated as I do now. Karen's condition is worsening. After this wedding, she might not be around much longer. Please, Amanda, don't make this harder for me. I see the familiar love in his eyes, but it feels so distant. I realize I really should leave. The day of the wedding is deemed auspicious. I take my son's hand and attend the ceremony, my husband marrying another woman. It's absurd, yet so many people participate. I sit in the back, listening as the host speaks. These two families are united, despite past separations. These are Karen's last days, but also her best days. They're living each moment as if it's their last. Karen, with her delicate makeup, still looks pale. A teenage girl next to her sobs. It's so sad. They finally found each other again, but they might be apart in a few months. As I hear them lamenting Karen, I wonder if they've forgotten I'm here, Mike's wife and our son's mother. When it's Mike's turn to speak, he looks dashing in his suit. His eyes find me and for a moment he seems reassured. But I turn away, refusing to look. He holds the microphone and smiles at Karen. I hope you're happy every day. Karen nodded, unable to hide her excitement. Thanks, Mike, this is the best time of my life. There may also be speeches from the parents, drinking wine from the same cup, and even so-called vows between husband and wife. I don't know how they are going to make this wedding look genuine. I really can't stand it anymore. Holding my son's hand, I decided to leave. There was a heavy storm outside the window, and the crackling sound of the rain was like the pain in my heart at this moment. The rain is getting heavier. When we drove home and took Nate out of the car, I found that his whole body was hot. My son has a fever. I hurriedly called the driver and my family doctor, but neither of them answered. Then I remembered that they should all be at my husband and Karen's wedding drunk. After hesitating for a while, I still called Mike. The phone rang for a long time, but it was Karen's voice. Amanda, you're so annoying. Today is our wedding. Can't you just avoid it? The ex who was always weak and helpless in front of Mike now showed her true colors on the phone. I looked down at my son, whose whole body was burning with fever, and raised my voice. Let Mike answer the phone. Karen snorted coldly, her voice light and disdainful. Amanda, Mike is toasting the guests and has no time to pay attention to you. Today is our wedding, can't you just hide for a while and stop showing off your presents, okay? After saying that, she hung up the phone with a bang. Nate blushed and opened his eyes with difficulty. Mom, I feel so bad. Where is Daddy? I want Daddy. It was raining so hard that I was afraid to drive. I was completely soaked when I carried my son into the taxi. Fortunately, my son was protected by me and his body was still dry. The driver looked back at us and frowned in annoyance. What's wrong with your son? Don't let him die in my car. I looked up and glared at him, wanting to just pick up my son and get out of the car. But the rain outside was getting heavier. There were hardly any cars on the road. I endured the trembling all over my body before I spoke slowly. It's just a fever, take me to the hospital. The driver said "Ong" and suddenly looked at me with a predatory gaze. There was a hint of menace in his eyes. My whole body was drenched, making my figure particularly pronounced. Gritting my teeth, I quietly held my son's hand with one hand while pretending to be calm as I called Mike. The phone beeped for what felt like an eternity before it was finally picked up. Just as I was about to speak, Mike cut in. Good boy, Amanda. It suddenly rained heavily today and many guests can't get back. It's a bit chaotic here, I'll be busy now. Before I could respond, he hung up. Listening to the busy tone, a chill ran down my spine. The driver's profile in front of me looked wretched and frightening in the wind and rain. Suddenly, my son began to have difficulty breathing. I was terrified, shaking all over, but I had to pretend to be calm as I ended the call. Honey, just wait for me at the hospital entrance, I said. Yes, I took a taxi. I've sent you the license plate number and my real-time location, he replied. In that fear and urgency, the taxi finally arrived at the hospital entrance. The driver chuckled and said, Beautiful ladies, I'll charge you $50 for bringing you here in the heavy rain. Hey, where's your husband? This beauty is stunning. She must be a rich kid with someone waiting on her. I gritted my teeth in anger but didn't dare say anything. I hurriedly scanned the code to pay and rushed into the pouring rain with my son in my arms. Inside the hospital, the emergency nurse touched my son's forehead and frowned. Why is he so hot? He needs to see a doctor. Have the child's father take him to emergency room number 2 and go buy a towel to dry off. You're soaked and it's more dangerous for the baby with all this moisture. My whole body froze and I shook my head. There is no father. I came here alone with my son. The nurse's expression softened, and she rushed off to get 2 large towels for me. However, the news from the doctor was grim. Acute pneumonia. Very serious. I felt as if lightning had struck me, my body went limp and I could hardly stand. The doctor handed me a critical illness notice and said directly, sign this and go pay the fees. We will do our best. I always thought I was strong enough, but after all the challenges I faced with Mike over the years, I had never felt so utterly defeated. My son was rushed to the emergency room. I heard the doctor say, hurry, put the child on a ventilator. 2 nurses blocked me outside the emergency room. Wait at the door. Don't cry, it'll disturb the doctors. We'll do everything we can, one said calmly and professionally. I nodded blankly, moving like a robot, every motion heavy and stiff. Nearby, an elderly woman sweeping the floor sighed and gently patted my back. Her kindness was overshadowed by what she said next. You should have the child's father and grandparents come and prepare for the worst. My neighbor's grandson died of acute pneumonia last year. I looked at her numbly, and she gently slapped her hand against her cheek. I'm so sorry, dear. I didn't mean to upset you. Just a precaution. I closed my eyes and tried calling Mike again and again. The call connected only to drop, then connect again before hanging up once more. I felt myself weakening, finally collapsing to the ground. Mike, my son? Mike's voice on the other end was frantic. Amanda, Karen has heart palpitations and has passed out. The ambulance is on its way. Just wait until I get her in the ambulance before you tell me anything, okay? Amanda. Before I could respond, the suffocating busy tone filled the line. Beep, 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 beep. I sat stiffly on the ground, staring up at the ominous red light above the emergency room. My son is only 5 years old. If he were to leave this world, wouldn't it be a tragedy? Wouldn't it be heartbreaking? In the final moments of his life, he might not even see his beloved father one last time. Time dragged on painfully. Each second felt like a knife cutting through my heart. It was only about 40 minutes, but it felt like a century had passed. When the doctors and nurses wheeled Nate out, I felt a spark of life return. I rushed forward. Nate? The child on the gurney opened his eyes with great difficulty. His face was pale and he looked so fragile, like a bubble that might burst with the slightest touch. His once bright eyes seemed to have lost their shine. But when he saw me, he managed to pull the corners of his mouth into a weak smile. Don't cry, Mommy. Nate is fine. His words shattered the anger I had been holding in and tears streamed down my face. My son's voice was soft and weak. Is Dad here? I pursed my lips, unsure how to answer him. He had just undergone life-saving surgery, and I didn't want to say anything that might upset him. But my son was more perceptive than I had realized. Dad didn't come. He murmured, glancing sideways at me. Mom, I don't want Dad anymore. I only want you from now on. Wherever you go, I go. I held his hand and nodded, my heart swelling with love. Finally, he was admitted to the general ward and I coaxed him to sleep. The little ball curled up on the hospital bed looked like a wounded cub, so pitiful. In the middle of the night, the hospital was anything but quiet. The nurses on duty spoke in low voices. I heard it's Karen's ex again, Mike, the upstart businessman. Every time she comes, she consults with experts and foreign professors. She looks like a princess from some foreign land. I forced a smile, feeling numb inside. Another nurse continued. It's cancer, but it's still in the early stages. It's not that easy to die. She always bothers our nurses in the middle of the night. It's not that I'm unprofessional, but I get a headache just hearing her name. I thought to myself, so Karen isn't that easy to kill off. If Mike knew this, he'd be thrilled. I lay beside my son's hospital bed and fell asleep peacefully. I once thought of all the ways to get close to Mike. Hiking, fishing, doing anything to make him happy. We lived together in a basement, running a business and working hard to support the Shao family. When we first made some money, we celebrated by sharing a bowl of beef noodles. Just one bowl for 2 people, hoping the other would take an extra slice of beef. I never doubted the sincerity Mike showed me. But sincerity can change quickly. His love for me was built on the support we provided each other after Karen left, a family obligation to raise our children together. Yet, it couldn't compare to the idealized figure from his youth, Karen, the one he lost when he was young and reckless, his unattainable white moonlight that always stirred in his heart. I opened my eyes blearily, wiped the sweat from my son's forehead, and felt nothing but irony. How could it be that Mike seemed to have everything? It's astonishing how quickly kids can bounce back. After just a night's rest and some medication, my son looked energetic when he woke up at noon the next day. I fed him some white porridge and remembered that I had turned on flight mode on my phone the night before to avoid disturbing his sleep. Turning it on, I saw Mike's call coming in. Amanda, where have you and your son been? I didn't answer the phone and no one was home. Don't you know I was worried? I calmly turned on the hospital TV for my son, and Zootopia was playing, filling the room with lively sounds. Glancing at the child, the little guy had no intention of answering his father's call. He was too smart for his own good, having already experienced pain at such a young age. Karen isn't dead again, is she? Mike's voice was filled with anger. Amanda, how can you say such things? Do you know how dangerous it was last night? She almost didn't make it. I replied coldly, it's none of my business. Since Mike called me mean, I decided to really say something hurtful. Should I be polite to a woman who's begging for a wedding with a married man? Without waiting for his response, I added, when we're free, let's go get a divorce certificate. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone before Mike's voice softened. Amanda, where are you? I'm coming to find you. I thought for a moment and gave him my son's ward number. After all, even if I didn't tell him, Mike would eventually figure it out. Soon Mike rushed over. He looked a bit embarrassed, his beautiful, expressive eyes glancing toward the bed. Son, are you okay? He asked. I shook my head. I'm fine. The worst is over. But at that critical moment, the father didn't show up. It He didn't need to anymore. I didn't know my son suddenly had pneumonia. Otherwise, Mike hurriedly explained. I smirked, sarcasm in my eyes. Otherwise, you would have left the wedding guests and the unconscious Karen to come take care of your son? Mike paused, finally admitting, yes. He didn't even know what choice he would have made if it had really happened last night. Fortunately, I had given up on any extravagant hopes. Any disappointment in Mike could no longer hurt me. Mike drove my son and me home, trying to compensate for his failure as a father by finding ways to make his son happy. But the little guy seemed to have grown up overnight. He leaned into my arms, barely paying attention to Mike. Mom, is the world we're going to fun? He asked quietly. I replied, it's fun. You'll have grandparents who love you and a very handsome uncle. At that moment, it hit me how ridiculous it was to have stayed in this world for Mike over the past 3 years. My relatives must miss me dearly. As the door opened, the air filled with the familiar scent of family togetherness. I coaxed my son to sleep, then walked with Mike beneath the sycamore trees, golden leaves falling around us. Mike, we've known each other for almost 10 years, I said. Yeah, he murmured, lost in thought. 10 years ago, Amanda, you appeared before me like an angel. I shook my head. I'm not an angel, I was just here for you. Yet in the end I chose to leave. The old beef noodle shop was still thriving. The same owner ran it, but he had a new wife. I heard the former owner's wife died of gas poisoning 2 years ago, and he remarried just 6 months later. Honestly, it hardly mattered. I ordered a bowl of beef noodles and pushed it toward Mike. You eat? Mike looked surprised and picked up a piece of beef, offering it to me. Amanda, this is for you? I shook my head. I'm not hungry. I want to watch you eat. Under my gaze, Mike's mood seemed to brighten. He chewed slowly, his voice filled with hope for the future. Amanda, we found a doctor from Country M. His skills are impressive. He said he could give Karen another 3 to 5 years of life. Once I settle Karen down, I'll take you and Nate on a trip around the world. I stared at him, listening to his visions of the future. I should be part of that future. It should include me, my son, and Karen. What a pity. But he was no longer in mine. Mike had to leave early the next morning to pick up the doctor, arriving at 7:30 a.m. Out of respect, he got up at 6 and drove to the airport, taking Karen with him along the way. They wore wedding attire together. They might have even shared wedding wine. Though not officially husband and wife, they were the closest people in the world. As Mike left with his briefcase, I straightened his shirt collar. Drive carefully, I said. He smiled. Don't worry, honey. You and Nate will wait for me at home. I didn't respond and handed him a box of milk and some bread. Eat a little on the way. Don't go hungry. Your stomach isn't in good shape to begin with. Mike nodded. At the door, he leaned down to kiss my forehead, but I dodged. He frowned, coaxing, wait until I'm back, wife. I waved goodbye. After he left, my son and I packed up most of our things and tossed them out, deleting all our photos. I nodded as my son held my hand, looking at our home with a hint of attachment. Mom, he said, gripping my hand tightly. Though small, his eyes were firm. Don't worry, Mom. I'll always be with you. With my son in tow, nothing in this world held my attachment anymore. Mike was devastated by our sudden disappearance. He searched for us endlessly, calling me repeatedly. It was as if we had vanished into thin air. Mike finally began to panic. Neither property management nor surveillance could track where we had gone. He asked my parents and brother for help, but they kicked him out without giving him any information. He even hired a private detective and a hacker to dig into my parents' call records, but my brother blocked him completely. This was the perfect revenge I wanted. A missing wife and son, leaving him to guess and feel guilty forever. Karen tried to comfort him, saying, Mike, don't worry. Amanda must be mad at me, so she ran away. She'll be back soon. She said a lot, but Mike ignored her. He continued frantically searching for me and the child. Eventually, Karen grew frustrated and fainted again. But Mike had seemingly lost all patience for her and ignored her completely. Days turned into weeks and Mike searched for me like a madman. He went to all the places I might be. The beach where we first met, our old apartment, my favorite dessert shop, the entrance to my son's kindergarten, and the hospital ward where we'd once been. Nowhere to be found. I had vanished as if I had never existed. He hadn't eaten properly in over 2 months, and fatigue had thinned his once handsome face. Due to irregular meals and alcohol, Mike's stomach issues flared on a rainy night. He shook with pain, dialing my number frantically again and again, only to hear, the number you dialed is unavailable. In endless despair, he sat on his doorstep, staring blankly at the pouring rain outside. His eyes suddenly turned red, perhaps recalling the night of his wedding to Karen while I held our feverish son, hanging up on him repeatedly. Did he feel the same despair? Or maybe he simply missed the days when I cared for him. At least then he had someone to ensure he ate and didn't suffer. I heard Karen tried to care for him, but he scolded her and sent her away. Karen, it's all your fault. You made me like this. I don't have a wife or children now. Aren't you proud? Karen looked at Mike in disbelief, her face filled with pain. She staggered back, having never said anything harsh to him before. Shaking, she begged, Mike, please don't say that. I can't bear it. At that moment, a fierce hatred surged in Mike's eyes as he glared at her. Karen, you're going to die soon. Why don't you just do it now? My Amanda is gone. How are you still alive? If you had died earlier, my wife and son wouldn't have left me. It's all your fault, Karen. You've wronged me. Such serious words drove Karen, who always pretended to be the good one, to madness. Always weak, she stood, hair disheveled, and pushed Mike furiously. Did I force you to do that? You were the one who said you never wanted me to be sad and that you'd take care of me. Did I hold a knife to your neck? They tore at each other's wounds, exchanging the most vicious words, and soon began wrestling violently like two rabid dogs. Two mad dogs. How ridiculous. 6 months after my son and I left, everyone said Mike had gone crazy. None of this mattered to me anymore. With the help of my parents and brother, I changed my identity and began a happy life with my child.